Mitchell has his head up, takes LeVert feet. Oh my!
Hello everyone, very special episode today. As you can hear, this one is in English again. So once again, if you go onto YouTube, you will have French subtitles. If you want to follow the podcast and you're not sure how your English is, we have put French subtitles within YouTube. And today, very special podcast too, because we have a special guest straight out from the US, Marc Campbell. Maybe you know him under the name of Low Man Help. And it's been quite of the discovery from the last few months for me. And it all started with an article that was spelled, What Kaiser Soze Taught Me About the Pump Fake. And I'm a huge fan of Usual Suspect. And I'm a huge fan of Subtract article, a bit like shady that nobody really can nobody really knows who's the author and where does that come from. And I happened to find out about this article on a Discord that is based on a podcast from France. So very surprising to end up finding this one. Read the article, start like chatting a bit about with Marc, and here we are today to talk about basketball, about player development with Marc. And Marc, maybe for the French audience, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, Marc Campbell. I played collegiately at North Carolina. Then I played a little bit in Europe, a little bit overseas. I did Italy, Germany, and Estonia. And for the past 5 seasons, I've been working with NBA players as a shooting coach, development coach. And this past year, I just started for the first time publishing work on Substack. So I've written 6 articles now, and they've been a blast to do. And it's been really cool interacting with new people like Az, and just meeting people that are truly into hoops and want to figure out how to get better or just talk about hoops or anything. And it's been a blast.
Cool. Well, thank you for being with us today. Maybe can you tell us, like, how did you become, before getting into articles, into being a shooting coach? Because it's very specific. Like, it's not like you're not a basket coach per se. It's like very specific to shooting. So what's like the behind story on that?
Yeah. Well, actually, after I finished playing, I didn't do anything coaching wise or anything with basketball for a few years. And then I was actually at a Lifetime Fitness, which is like a gym in America, like a Globo gym type thing. And I was just shooting, like working some stuff, doing some things. And there was a guy on the other side of the court, and I was wearing shorts from a team in Italy. And he had just played his past year in Italy. So he was like, oh man, like saw the shorts. We talked for a little bit. He was like, hey, what were you like working on down there? And I was just doing a few things, like messing around. And I was like, this, that, and the other. And he was like, hey, like, would you mind like showing me a few things that you're doing? So I really fell into, that was the first time I worked with a player. And it was this guy at Lifetime Fitness that was like, hey, would you show me a few things? And so that summer I ended up working with him. And then, you know, a week or two in, he was like, hey, can I bring this guy? And it was a guy that played in the G League. And he was like, hey, can I bring this guy? It was a guy that played in Turkey. And after the end of that summer, like they went back, they had good years. And the next year, his best friend, who's an agent in the NBA, Richard Gray, reached out to me and was like, hey, I have this guy, you know, would you be interested? Like, Ishan said great things about you, all this other stuff. And I kind of just, you know, went into it. And you know, once I was like, okay, I'm going to work with an NBA guy, and the first guy was Malik Beasley, I was like, I need to dig in and figure out like what is the thing that I believe in that is going to translate to this level. Like what's the thing for Malik that's the epicenter, that's, you know, his problem area, where the problem coverage is, like how do we solve that and things like that. And I just kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And then one project goes well, you get more feedback. Next project goes well. So I really just backed into it. It wasn't something where I was like, I'm going to do this and this is it. I was just at Lifetime Fitness, just shooting hoops.
It's crazy, but like, what were you doing with your shoot? Like back in Italy or in Europe, were you like a good 3-point shooters? Like, did you have like things that you didn't do at the same as other players do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 5'11" and I've never dunked. So like I had to be able to shoot. and I, like when I played at Carolina, so I originally signed a scholarship at a smaller college and then transferred in and walked on at Carolina, and then got a scholarship there later after being a walk-on and earning one. But when I was there, I played against like 8 draft picks. Like Ty Lawson was there, Tyler Hansborough, Wayne Ellington, Danny Green. And so every day in practice, I was playing against these guys that were like NBA level athletes. And if I tried to play the same game as them, I would have just like crumbled because I'm not athletic. So I had to start looking at the game so differently. And my first year at Carolina was absolutely brutal. Like I was like, I am awful at basketball. I cannot do anything. It was brutal, but I had to start looking at it differently, working at it differently, and kind of seeing like different angles. And that really like started to grow as I got better and better at like combating this deficiency of athleticism. And then shooting for me became the thing of like, I really realized like, okay, like I'm not as quick, but if I can shoot, like the spacing becomes a lot bigger for me because like they have to be closer. And like if I can learn how to play at these different speeds, these rhythms, this call them the core 3 changes, change of speed, levels, and direction. Like if I can learn to play in those more, like I can maybe not look as slow and maybe be more effective. So I just started to have to see the game differently than I ever did before because of this bump in athleticism. And so I think I've tried to take like those things that really helped me. And when you start applying those things to people that are actually incredibly athletic, it really compounds in a different way than if you're unathletic like me. So I think that's kind of how I've always looked at it. And then the more I've been in this world, like the deeper and deeper I've dug into kind of like the process and the why behind things. And then that's always helped applying like the applied knowledge and compounding on the already like seeing the game differently type thing.
Yeah, and I feel like it happens at a good time in the basketball evolution. Like, because no shooting is so important. Like, there is no player in the NBA that will have a like 15 years career that can't shoot. So I feel like being a shooting coach at that moment might be even more important than it could have been like maybe 10 years before. I feel like it's way more different. Like it's before it was like a skill, like an up skill that could put you like to an all-star level. I feel like if you don't have it in the NBA, there is maybe no way you can stay in the NBA for like 10 years without shooting.
Yeah, I just wrote a piece today or published it about like how I like to build a plan or how I like to look at a shot. And so to me, I try to think of shooting as the meta skill. So meta means most effective tactic available. So I try to think of shooting as the meta skill, and to me it raises all the other skills, because if I'm not as good of a driver and I can't shoot, well, the distance, I'm not going to be able to overcome this distance. But if I can shoot, well, then the distance becomes shorter and you have to run at me at a different speed than if I couldn't shoot. So now, like, not only am I attacking more space, but I'm also attacking from being in rhythm and on balance, and you're guarding me from like, oh shit, I got to go get there. So to me, it's one of the, or pick and roll coverages. Like, if you can go under a screen because I can't shoot, well, the shell compresses and it shrinks. But if you have to go over it, because if you go under, I will shoot and beat it. Well, now like the shell starts to get cracked open, and we start to then get to the point where, I don't just see it as like coaching shooting, but more so like using shooting to open up simple reads of like yes or no. Like, does this player help up the lane? Great, lob. Like, do they stay back? I finish. But using shooting to stretch the floor and to change the gravity, I feel like is something that, for me, it goes into absolutely every different pocket on the court. It's that valuable.
Yeah, I feel like one of the piece that you wrote that talked more about it is like, where is my space, the wings. And I feel like, so it's not really about shooting, it's about spacing. Like, where do I get my space from, and how do I use it? And we can see, like nowadays, offense start midcourt, which is like kind of tremendous because then you have so much space to attack from. But I feel like, do you see like teams as the Utah Jazz, for example, they don't have any playmaker per se, like NBA All-Star playmaker, but they still are able to attack that space. So it's not only individual, like it's more like a team thing. But do you feel like in a team like every player has to be able to shoot, or it's more like every players has to know to use the space?
Yeah, well, I think it helps if they can all shoot. Like, you know, that's a luxury. I know it's not always going to be that way, but in terms of space, like the whims, I use that with every client. Like, and I think there's so many times where you're coming up to this NBA level, and if you've made it here, you've most likely been the center of attention on any team. And
Yeah.
so like everything's been run around you and all this other stuff. And I kind of look at NBA offenses, there's two different things. The shell can either be set, like the defensive shell, or it can be cracked. And you're either the one doing the cracking, which is you're driving by somebody. And if that's the case, you just want to read like, okay, is this help early coming? If it's early help, I want to move it early. If it's late help, I want to go finish. And so that happens, you know, some, but you're usually not that guy that's doing that all the time. You're usually the guy who's playing on the back end of the shell that's cracked. So I think it's so important to teach guys like, or get guys to understand, like, if you want shots that are like wide open and in rhythm and on balance, like feeling when that shell is cracked, feeling when your defender takes his whole like mental takes his whole mental approach and shifts it away from you and seeing the ball, then at that point, that's when you want to be reading, okay, like where is my space? Like where can this ball come, that it's going to come in a straight line out of this drive where I need to be? And to me, that's one of the most important things in terms of working with a player, like understanding like there are all these opportunities out there. You just have to read when the shell is cracked, and whether you're cutting to finish or cutting to shoot, like that's really the key moment for guys.
Yeah, I really love that thing about like the straight line. Like remember that players can move in different ways. The ball, like the ball moves faster, but she can only moves in one direction.
One
So
direction.
that's really something. And most of the time you don't have the ball unless you're like Luka Doncic. Like most of the time you don't have the ball in his hand. And even I don't think Luka Doncic has the ball like 80% of the time when he's on the court. So even Luka has to know how to play off ball. So like it's one of the main things. So one of the things you're trying to learn to your client is to be not that guy, pretty much. It's like to learn how to be off ball, but still be a threat to the defense.
Yeah, like even if you're not getting a play run for you, the like in the NBA, like I think I've played in Europe and like worked with guys in EuroLeague. EuroLeague in Europe is way more about plays. Like you're running a play and you're trying to like get these things in a play. The NBA game is way more about like hunting a specific action that we think can gain us an advantage and crack the shell, and then playing off of that. So understanding that like that's what the offense is really looking for. It's hunting for like that pressure point where like we can create a rotation, we can create help. And most of the time, that's not going to be you. Like that's guys like Luka or Jokic or guy Giannis. Like those are the guys that are cracking the shell more often than not. And when you're playing with people like that, understanding that, okay, when this shell gets cracked, like understanding I need to be on this movement pattern where the ball can come through here, not backwards. Like because the ball can go on a straight line, but the person's eyes are also going in like that direction. So if you're moving away from their eye line, well, even though the ball can go in a straight line behind you, they can't see you. So it's like a mix of you have to move in a straight line with the basketball, but you also have to move in the eye line of the player that is cracking the shell.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because like the spacing, then it's not just like the space of the floor, it's where the light can be, the light being where the player that has the ball can see, plus the ball can reach without someone else between the light and the straight line. So
Yeah.
but I don't think like we realize as people that watch basketball how complex it is and why some like passes can't be made, or are some of the Jokic pass are just something incredible because he sees light where most of the people can't see it, I guess.
Yeah.
So I feel like training with Jokic must be like feel like the Denver team that won last year, they learn how to play with Jokic. I feel like it's even another learning that just you learn how to play off ball, and then you learn how to play off ball with Jokic. There must
Yes.
be a difference.
There is a difference. Yeah, there's an
Definitely.
absolute difference. He does a great job of, like most players, what we talked about earlier of like, if it's early help, it's early pass. If it's late help, I go finish. Well, like most players see early help that are good. But Jokic and like the great players like Jokic, LeBron, Luka, these guys, they not only see help, they see help the helper. So they see that one layer pass. So if Luka's downhill in a pick and roll and he's 2-on-1, well, he's seeing, is low man help coming over or is low man help already there? So if low man help's coming over, well, he can throw to the corner because their momentum is coming in. If they're already there, like he's pushing and knows it's not an early pass. So I just think there are certain guys that you can't always teach what they do, and seeing the play not only just help is a good thing, seeing help the helper is even better. And then once those guys start getting the reps, like it's the same picture over and over and over again. It's not like it's this overly complicated thing where help's going to come from some random direction. Like if help's coming from the baseline, that means there's a guy in the corner. And those guys just have so many reps in the Rolodex that they know if help's coming that way, I'm throwing that way. And Jokic throws them blind a lot because he just sees the whole picture.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to see. I feel like we should appreciate that a bit more because it's pretty unique, and it's not like we've seen that a lot before. I think LeBron has some of it, but like Jokic has been just something really different. And coming from Europe, I feel like we're kind of proud that some of the European are able to, crack the shell of the NBA with Luka, with Giannis, with Jokic. Like, it's been good to see, like, and not only with physicality, like technicity helps a lot. I had a question about like maybe what the process is like for you when you get a new client. What are the things that you're looking at? Because you already know you're not looking at like an all-star player. Like most of your clients need to learn to play off ball. So what are the things you look at? Is it like more of the off ball game, or do you look like the full picture?
I think they're all different. They're all unique.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the first thing that I like to look at is like what is the one I think of development plans as epicenters. So I try to always like drill it down of like, okay, if this is going wrong, why is it going wrong? Well, if we change this, what happens? And so I always try to drill it down to like, where is this epicenter that if we get this one thing right, their game can start to like build and build and build. And everything in basketball is like, if this, then that, if this, then that. So a lot of times with any client, it comes down to shooting. Because if all of a sudden, like we talked about earlier, if you're shooting better, then, closeouts become easier to deal with. And, pick and rolls become easier to read because the coverage is going to be a certain way, and handoffs become easier to deal with. So for me, the biggest thing is looking at one, like, what does the shot look like biomechanically?
Okay.
Where are our problem areas? Like, where are the things that we're going to like sharpen up? And then if we do that, okay, what are the biggest inflection point moments where they're getting these shots? And then what happens if they start making them? Like, what would be the next thing that the defense would do? And we need to work on that thing so that we're prepared to go into it. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me, like locking in on what we can do to raise the level of the shot, and then where those shots are coming from, and trying to hunt more and more of them.
Okay, but when you look at like the physicality of it, like all the body moves when the player is shooting, is there like parts of the body you're focusing? I don't know. It's a stupid question, but are you focusing on like all the neck and the eyes are towards the basket? Are you looking at the knees, the ankles? I don't know, like the elbow, like anything.
Yeah.
What? Because like like I feel like shooting. I was talking about it with other people that watch soccer, for example, and shooting basketball is one of the most complex, I don't know, like sport movement that I've ever seen, because everything needs to be in rhythm. and it's so hard to master. And even Stephen Curry only shoot like 50% from open threes in his career. Like even the guy that master it has it only once every 2 times. That's so hard it is. So it's pretty like, because when you see Curry being open, you assume it's gonna be in, but in reality, it's just like throwing a piece in the air and being sure it's gonna be like one face or the other. That's not going to happen. So it's really hard because like you need to master like every part of the body. So I was thinking like, is there like part of the body you're looking at, and are you also looking from the side of a player or from the face of the player, or both probably? Because I feel like even you see a basketball player shooting from face and from the side, and there is things that you can't see from the face that you will see from the side, and the other way around. So where are you looking at?
Well, in terms of like where I like to be, I always like to be on the side. Like whenever I'm doing sessions and whenever I'm teaching, like for me, the side is the place that I like to be in terms of like whatever I'm looking at, whatever the pressure point is or whatever the inflection point is within their body that I'm focused on in that rep. I usually like to do it from the side. I just think you get a better angle of, for me, the stuff that I think is really important. That's kind of the angle. When I'm trying to analyze it and when I'm trying to look into it and when we're going to fix stuff or get in there and try to rewire, to me, it's all about shooting is an exercise of transferring energy and trying to transfer energy in the most efficient, rhythmic way. So you're working when you're shooting with like all these small little machines that are going to come together to create this one big giant process. And the key is you have to get that machine firing in order to work with the basketball. Like it's not just about your body doing it, it's about your body and the basketball being in rhythm and balance throughout the whole process. So to me, it's more so of like trying to merge these things together and understanding that it's actually not, I know it seems like a complex movement, but it's actually not a complex movement. You're just taking these small little machines and you're putting them together where they go in order. And so like I love that stuff. Like I love digging into like, reverse engineering things and stuff like that. So like when I think about changing a shot or looking at a shot, that's all it is. It's about trying to load the energy in the most efficient places possible and then start the sequence of transferring the shot up the body in rhythm and on balance with the basketball.
So transferring means like there is a process that is longer or shorter. And do you try to make the clients, the players, making a shot quicker or not? Like, is it one of the aspects of a good shot being like quicker? Like we can see Curry, it takes him like probably half of the time that Kyle Anderson has to take a shot. Like, and then maybe those are the two, like, the two opposite. But there is like, okay, maybe Curry can shoot like twice when Kyle Anderson can shoot once, but still they can both make it in the NBA. Like both of them are like shooting 3-pointer in the NBA. Is like the quickness of it one of the factors that you think could be a good shooter? Because even we see like Nicolas Batum from France, he has the like this no deep type of shooting. You see like when he catch the ball and he doesn't reload per se. Like, do you think quickness and is one of the part of like the effectiveness per se, or do you think you rather want to have a slow shot than a bad shot?
I think for me, I always try to think of it this way, and I always tell clients this: we're looking for your unique fingerprint, like your unique shooting fingerprint. Like we all have these different fingerprints, and everybody's body's different. Like the mechanical makeup of like long arms, short arms, hips, ankle impingements, all these things, it's all different. So we're trying to find the unique fingerprint for this guy's shot and how it moves in rhythm and balance for them. So speed in terms of like we wanted to go quicker or we wanted to go slower. I think the biggest key to me is we want to naturally find the speed, and the cleaner you get the habits. Like one of the reasons why Steph can shoot so fast is all his little simple machines like they're smooth, like they're carved smoothly. There's no gunk in them. Like you think of it as like a car engine, he's not driving an old beater. Like he's driving a nice Ferrari. Like it's maintenance. Like everything's clean. So his machine moves smooth. It's got oil in it. Like it's really moving smooth. Like the energy is transferring efficiently within his shot. And so when you're doing that, like it's all process. And so when you're changing a shot, it starts off slower. Like you start off, digging into specific habits and trying to like pinpoint epicenters and then make those habits stressed and try to change them. And so as they get better, the shot naturally moves to its own rhythm, and the rhythm with the player's body, the rhythm with the player's basketball and the body together, like all that stuff. So I try not to focus so much on it needs to be this or it needs to be that. Like we want to find that unique fingerprint.
Okay, so like a guy like Tyrese Haliburton, he has a pretty weird way of shooting, but at the same time, he's one of the most efficient pull-up three-point shooter of the NBA. I think last year on big volume, he was like second behind Steph Curry in terms of pull-up shoot. But at the same time, when he was drafted, like his shot looks so weird, like the way he break, like it's just it felt weird. But if it's working, then it's okay. Like you're pretty much saying like if it works with you, then it's fine, and as long as it works, it's okay, right?
Yeah, I think like Tyrese specifically, I have a theory that like you can't have bad process and also have bad results. Then you have to change. But if you have what's considered not textbook process in terms of
Yeah.
your shooting mechanics, but you have the results that work for you, then there's no need to mess with it. But you can't have bad process and be a bad shooter results wise. Then you have to get back in there and try to rewire things. But if a guy's shooting 40% on high volume, and just because it looks different, but he's got his own, like he's never out of rhythm when he shoots it. He's got his rhythm, his natural rhythm, his natural balance. So you don't mess with something that's like, even though you might think it's bad process, if it's his rhythm and he likes it and it's natural and it's good results, you don't mess with it. It's when it's not good results that then you go back in.
Then it's perfect because like my other question was, what's good results? Like how do you, because you need to evaluate success. I feel like those players, they came at you as clients, and as a client you expect success or at least like improvement. How do you measure that a player has improved? Because like you want to impact like their number in games, and games there are just like 80 of them in a season. So you need a big sample, I feel like, to validate that your work did have an impact on his career or his shooting. Like, how do you evaluate like what's a success?
Yeah. Well, I think like guys feel it on the court, and they usually feel it before they go into the season, and you'll see it the way that they attack different actions. And I always try to think of, when I'm working with somebody, we always try to look at not so much makes and misses in terms of the ball going in or not, but more so like their process. Like, is every catch like great shot prep? Are you shooting the shots you should shoot and attacking the closeouts you shouldn't shoot? And I think we try to look at it over the course of 82 games. If you're playing with good process, if you've done all the right stuff beforehand, like work wise, then the numbers should win out over that big of a sample size. Like you don't want to get caught up in like, oh, you went 0 for 3 tonight or 0 for 4. If they were all good shots, and not just good shots of you should have taken them, but they were all good shots in terms of your biomechanics and your process before the shot, well, then you have to keep like leaning into like, you've done everything right. You've done everything right. You've done everything right. So I've been fortunate to have success with guys, but that's kind of the biggest thing, is like trying to get them out of their head of the makes and the misses happen before you shoot the ball with what you're doing with your process in terms of shot prep and everything like that.
Yeah, it must be tough when the players just like it just finished working with you all summer, start a new season, and you always want to look at what the numbers like. But I feel like it's so much of a small sample. Like we all do that. Like every NBA analyst, or we start looking at statistic like before Christmas, or before All-Star game. It's 20 games, but we always look to like, find some stuff like, oh yeah, he works on his shot over the summer, but it's like it's 20 game. Like
Yeah.
not everybody can look hot over 20 games, but sometimes yeah, like, and it's
Yeah.
just like you need to have a bigger sample and to look at the process more than the results, because you need like 2 seasons, I think, to make sure a player is an actual good 3-point shooter. Like we had Julius Randle coming to like 40% like a season 3-pointer, then going back to 32, back to 40. Like, I feel like it's hard to evaluate because even those guys are playing 82 games from one season to another. The number, they don't look the same. So might as well look at the process, because the process usually like remains the same.
Yeah, I try to look at it as that. I also think that the way that people guard you will really tell the story of like, have you gotten better as a shooter or not? So in the NBA, I try to look at it as like, there's like neutral defense. So
Yeah.
like, you're an average shooter, or like this is the base defense for a team. And I always think the easiest way to see it is nail help. So like if there's a pick and roll happening and you're the first guy on the other side and your man is nail help, like there's a standard place that nail help is in the NBA. And then I try to
Yeah.
look at it as like two degrees each way. So like if you're not a great shooter and below average, there'll be like one step closer to the nail. And then if you're really a bad shooter, it'll be like my foot's on the nail. And then it goes the other way. So if you're an above average shooter, it's one step closer to the player away from the nail. And then if you're just that guy where it's no catch, no shot, it's another step away from the nail. And I try to look at it as that, in terms of like, that's how I think of, is your shooting getting better or not getting better? Yes, there's the process and there's makes and misses, but whoever is guarding you always knows, because they're going to be the ones that are either getting the scouting report, or they're going to be the ones when they give up a shot and you make it, that they're like, hey, look, we said no catch there. So like that's a bad defensive possession. Then it's going to affect their playing time. I always think that's maybe the easiest way to look at, like, the guys on the court know. And if the guys on the court are farther away from you, it's not happening. If they're closer to you, it's happening.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, because we see some players, like I feel like this season, Josh Giddey, for example, has been completely like ignored by defense when it comes to 3-pointer. But then it comes another question for me, is like, can every player can be a decent 3-point shooter? Like not maybe centers, I feel like having bigger hands makes it more difficult from what I understood. And you can tell me like if you think that's right, but from what I understood, like players like Shaq or even Rajon Rondo, he had like big hand, and therefore like what they said is like it's harder for them to have like a good shoot, and therefore those guys can't shoot. But then you have like Josh Giddey, for example, which has like a like a young career in the NBA, but he start being like ignored in the OKC offense, where they kind of need spacing. So do you think like all of these players could have been like good 3-point shooter, or there is some requirements that you need to have to get there?
Anybody can be a good 3-point shooter in the NBA. These guys, I think one thing that I've learned over the 5 years of like being around NBA guys, they're the most athletic humans on the planet. And if they can get a hold of putting their body in rhythm and balance with the basketball and the correct habits, they can all be good shooters. Now, like the degree of great shooter, I think really comes down to like what a guy thinks he is up here. Like there are certain players who don't see themselves, no matter how good the mechanics get or how good the shot gets, of their hunting shots. And then there are guys that really believe like the mechanics are there, yes, but they believe that like I'm hunting shots all the time. And I think that's maybe something that you really can't teach, that separates like, okay, you're a good shooter mechanics wise, but then there's guys that are just like great shooters. And it's the mechanics, yes, but it's also the mindset.
Yeah, and kind of makes sense, because most of the player that comes to me where like the shoot is ignored is like Rajon Rondo, Draymond Green, Josh Giddey, and those guys are like pass first kind of a player, so they can stay in the NBA with like other things than shooting. But at the same time, it must be frustrating for like, I don't know, like Warriors fan, for example, that Draymond Green never had a shot. And when you look at, I think it's the game 7 of 2016. I think in the first half, he has like 5 2-pointers. And then you're like, this is what Draymond Green could have been? Or do you think like Draymond Green never could have been, or like 37% 3-point player?
I think that it's all like, obviously he's athletic enough that he could get it. I think it's all about kind of what you're working on, how you're working on it, like what your mindset is. Like, I think changing a shot isn't just like, do this. Like I've worked with guys and they'll just be like, just tell me what to do. And one thing that I think is important, like that never gets it. I always like talk to them about like, if we're going to do this, like I can't tell you what to do. Like you have to start to understand why you're doing it. And I think like changing a shot, like the guy has to understand why they're doing something, why they're working on a certain thing, and why it matters to how this chain reaction of the shot happens. So like Draymond, for instance, I have no idea what Draymond works on, but like, yeah, of course it's possible for him to be a good shooter. Yeah, he's found a way to be incredibly effective without doing it, because he does like really smart things with the lack of spacing in terms of guys guarding him, by going into like quick get actions with Steph or DHO actions or things like that, and playing downhill. And he's also been very fortunate to play with Steph because it creates like a very different level of gravity, but he's been smart enough to figure out how to kind of cover up that spacing issue with intelligent play. But yes, of course he could get to that level. It's just about what you work on.
Definitely. Plus his defensive work must require some time, because like is a beast when it comes to defense. Like he's maybe one of the most influential player in the last 20 years when it comes to defense. I mean, from my perspective at least. So this also must require all the time. Like you cannot be only working on like shooting. You have
and
so many things to
energy output. Yeah, the energy output for like his defensive work. I think that's maybe like one of the things that's like, you know, if we're talking about shooting as this machine, like it needs juice, it needs power. And, you know, you can find that power with footwork and all this other stuff, but the output that he's putting out of banging bodies, of moving, of talking, you know, he's taking the burden of energy on defense so that other guys can, you know, charge up a little bit more energy to play offense with. So I think that also goes into it in terms of like, he's maybe conserving a little bit on offense and like, you know, more of a connector and all these other stuff that isn't really requiring the big like output of shooting a basketball from 25 feet away, because he's giving it on the other end.
Yeah. Also, that's something we sometimes forgot. Like it goes both and they do work both way. One thing like that occurs to me when you were talking about mindset was the article about Nikola Jokic that you've done, when you said like kind of when Nikola Jokic become the guy that we know right now, and he then become like and the guy that makes think about Jokic before he became Jokic in France at least is Boris Dio. I don't know if you like remember, like, and like for us is, and when you look at the number, like you know, assist percentage, assist ratio compared to the usage, before Jokic became Jokic, they kind of started to look the same, because Boris Dio has been kind of frustrating for us in France because he was so pass first. Then his mindset, even like when working with the French team, he was always pass first, but he has like this mindset. He could play like 5, the point guard, like he was drafted as maybe a wing, like that was so different. Yeah. But so Bozio has his mindset all his career. But when you were like writing this piece on Jokic, what do you think has changed when it comes to Jokic starting to be more like into scoring? You mentioned Will Barton at some point in the article, pushing him to do that. Do you think it's like teammates, coaching staff, maybe even his evolution? Like, what do you think came behind this like scoring type of like change of mind? Even though I think he could even like use that more, and he's still being like very chill on that end.
So I was working with Malik Beasley for 2 years from 18 to 20. So I had watched the first season of film to build the plan. So I had watched like 3 years straight of Jokic. And I'll always remember this game in Atlanta because he always had it. Like he always had it and he always got good shots. But this was one where it really felt like he was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go get it. And it was a different level of aggression. It was a different level of shot. He was talking shit to the coach, like Lloyd Pierce. He was yapping, like he was doing everything. And I just felt like watching it, it really felt different from him in terms of the aggressiveness. And he used to always be aggressive at end of games because he's trying to win the game, and he would take whatever he thought was best for the team, but he wouldn't always be aggressive just throughout the game, like ultra aggressive. And so this one just felt different. And to me, it really felt like they had just come off this run in the playoffs. They had played 2 7-game series. He had had games where he had really shot a lot. And I have no clue if this is what he was thinking, but it really felt like he knew, okay, this is what games, because that was their first time in the playoffs. This is what games in the playoffs will look like. Like, I will shoot a lot. I will attack a lot. And maybe it was that he had that run that he felt more comfortable doing it. But to me, that night always stuck out of like in real time and even after of like, oh, wow, like he's really just like cranked it up. And I think a lot goes into it. I'm sure it's guys on the staff, like, you know, they were all in on him. Like there was no reason not to be in. Like he's awesome. And so I'm sure they were pumping him up. But I think one thing that happens in the league, he stepped out of the box that night. Like that was a different type game. Like he shot, 29 times or like 40 some odd shots with free throws. Like that was a career high for him. That was outside of the box. And if you step out of the box in the NBA of like what your kind of role is, teammates will either do one of two things. They'll either encourage you to keep going down that path, like, yes, like that's it. Like that's who you are. Like, do not stop. Or they'll kind of like, subtly let you know that maybe that was one step too far and come back. We really like you in the way that you are. We think it's a great system for us. And I think the response always, not just that night, but always when he started to like be aggressive from Will Barton, from Michael Malone, from anybody there was like, this guy's got it. And the minute he realizes he's got it and like we want him to even push further and further, like that's where we go like to the next level. And I just think it's cool when somebody does that and then they just keep going. Like they see this moment of like, oh, it can be more.
Yeah, I feel like even the old Denver team is last year felt like a good story, like the playoff. Like I feel like it was a good feeling to see like a team like them like winning the title, because we always remember only the team that won, and this team it felt right for what basketball is right now. Like
Yeah.
it felt like
Yeah.
the Murray thing, like, and the spacing, and Aaron Gordon being the player that it is. Like he was drafted in Orlando for being something else, like something that is not what it should be. But like in this team, like everything, like they were where they should be, and every series they have felt like they were going to win. So yeah, I feel like it's they're a good picture of what the NBA look like right now. We had so many years of like the centers are going to disappear. It's a point guard lead. We don't play post up anymore. Like they winning because they shooting mid range. They playing the post up. They have a center that can pass the ball. Like, and it's so nice to see that like when we think something is dead, it's actually killing the people that do not do it. And the post up is like a great example of that. Like the post up is being back up in the NBA with team using it more and more. And I don't know like if it's something you teach in your courses, but post up seems to be the ability to use post up, or to be able to being off ball when someone use the post up is something very important.
Yeah. I think when we talk about like things being dead or how Denver plays or anything like that, I think the biggest thing that basketball is now is it's a hunt for offensive optionality. So like any action that Denver runs, you can't put them in a box. Like if you on defense, you can take away things or you can put people to decisions, but you can't take away everything. Like you are eventually going to give up, like you are in a decision and if you try to do this one thing, you can't, but there's a solution another place. And so I think what the Jokic Nuggets are is they're this living embodiment of going like step by step through the process of reading coverage and being comfortable in taking what the option is. And that's not always something that teams can do because they don't have like the required skill. Like if we talk about, you know, the Golden State Warriors or Draymond before, like you can put them in a certain box. Like you can try to shut down Steph and all this other stuff, but you can put them in a box of like, we're going to give up shots here, there, and the other place. And you can live with that. With the Nuggets, like you can do that as well, but like they just have better answers to those questions. So like the post up, for instance, if the Nuggets do it, they're doing it because it creates, you know, you either go one-on-one with Jokic, which is not a smart idea, or you send help, which again, like every possession, you're just hunting, how can we crack this shell open? So if you're sending help, that means that like Jokic is going to find the right spot, whether it's help the helper. And now the shell is cracked and we're playing advantage basketball from, you know, early help pass, late help finish, whatever it is. So I think that's really the goal of basketball now. Like, what is the epicenter that you can go to that creates defensive rotation more than any other thing, and then play off that?
Yeah, it's like create like this finding the place where you create a small advantage and then having the connector to optimize it or to finish it. Because you don't want to have Jokic to score every bucket. You want him to be at the opening line, kind of like being the one that cracks it, but you want other player to finish it. Then you can create like different roads that could happen. So like the defense don't know where to sit. They know where the attack is coming, but they don't know where it's going to end, which is what it's the most threatened for the team.
Yeah, you're just looking for a pressure point to press on. You want to find a pressure point, and then you want to press and press and press. And they do that better than anybody else. But like a lot of teams can do that. Like Steph in a pick and roll or Steph in a handoff action, like that creates a pressure point where you have to say like, okay, are we coming up to give this shot away and then Draymond's in the short roll, or are we going to not give that up and just try to lock and trail and contest from behind? So every team is looking for that pressure point. And then the playoffs are maybe the best example of like kind of like whittling down of like what thing is really like not good enough to create optionality, and what thing is really like, oh man, we got to shut that off, otherwise we lose, and then play from there.
Yeah, and it comes again to one of your other article, and honestly, this is also a great piece, the panic thinking. And I think it humanized the NBA, because sometimes we look at it, and we had the same conversation with my brother. It's like we look at it even more from France. Like most of us never have been in an NBA stadium. I'm going to watch my first NBA game ever in life, like in 2 weeks.
What game?
Boston Celtics against Memphis Grizzlies.
Oh wow!
I was going there to see Marcus Smart, because Marcus Smart is like my favorite player. But then he's injured, so like yeah. Well, it's fine. I'm going to see family in Boston, watching a couple of games. It's going to be nice, but what it's going to be is going to be real. They're going to be actual human in front of my eyes, because what I've been seeing for like, I've been watching basketball since I'm 15, and the only scene I've seen is people on the screen. And sometimes I think, you know, you see it so much often, and you see like action again and again, and you expect them to do things well. And I really like the piece about like panic thinking, is because like they are doing things well because they used to do things, and what you want to make them doing when you're playing offense is to put them outside of the comfort zone. And I feel like we don't realize enough how much like some player, like all the basketball players, they're good at doing stuff because they're often doing the same, like a drop coverage. Like they know, they master it. Like you put someone random doing drop coverage, it looks simple. It's a pain in the ass to do, like the angle, everything. Like it seems easy, but it's so difficult. But because they do it so often, Rudy Gobert looks like like it's very gracious when he's doing drop coverage. Is 2 meters and 15 centimeters. The guy is huge, and I couldn't have his ability to move doing drop coverage because I'm not used to it. And I like the piece about panic thinking because I think he humanized the player because you want to make them panic. This is where you create errors, and this is where you create the advantage. And I think like that's something we need to better understand as like follower of the NBA. It's like those guys, they are still human beings. Like they are tired at the end of the game. They're not the same people that they were like an hour ago when they were starting playing, because it's very tiring. And sometimes I feel like we lose a sense of that by only watching game from all places and not having the feeling of that it's still human beings and it's still very like overwhelming as emotion and physicality.
Yeah. Well, I think like, so first off, Rudy, I saw Rudy for the first time. I went to, they have the pickup runs at UCLA. The first time I ever saw Rudy Gobert, I was at a pickup run at UCLA watching, and he was there. And I was like, this guy isn't human. Because I've been around, footers. Like I've been around footers and things like that. But like, there was something about like, his arms, his shoulders, like he was playing like just help side, and he was like low man help on something, and he was standing outside the lane, but like both feet were outside lane, but somehow his like hand was maybe like by the rim or something like that. And then he took it. It was just one of those things where it's a moment I'll never forget, because I was like, this guy and I are the same species? What? It was truly mesmerizing. Yeah, it was wild. But panic thinking, I heard it on a broadcast with Hubie Brown, and he just said it as like an offhand comment, and it just stuck with me because he was talking about a shooter, and I don't know if he was talking about like McDermott or Curry or somebody. He was talking about a shooter, and he just set a back screen, and the back screen led to like a wide open layup, and he just talked about like, he was like, great shooters make defenders panic thinkers. And when you panic, like, because you have to communicate, he was talking about when you have to communicate, it gives an opportunity for the defense to mess up. And if a shooter is doing something like that, well, like, you can't just switch the screen and not communicate and let somebody pop out. If it's not a good shooter, like, it doesn't matter. But if it's a great shooter, you're like, well, I can't let that happen. So you can give up, a back cut if you don't talk well, or if the other person doesn't listen, or you can give up a wide open three if the other person, same thing. So he was just talking about how, like, when you're a great shooter, if you set screens, if you move, like if you get to these inflection points where two people come together, it creates this moment where the defense has to communicate. And if the defense has to communicate, there's an opportunity for them to panic and mess up. And like, if you can hunt those moments, they're going to be gold, because they're not going to get it right every time. So it just stuck with me of like, this is it. Like, this is what you're looking for in like any kind of two-man game. And so when I think about, the Nuggets or the Warriors that I was talking about in that piece, or Steph and Draymond, like, the more that you play, we're talking about shooting with guys, the more that you play with process and you're willing to take the game and look at it as simple yes or no reads. So like the easiest one to talk about is like in a pick and roll or a handoff. Like, if my defender goes under, I shoot. Like, under equals shot. So like yes or no decisions. And then if it's over, I drive. And if I'm going to finish, and if the drop man helps, I pass. Like, if you can see the game in these simple yes or no decisions, and it takes an immense amount of skill to get to that point. But that's, I think, what he was saying. Like, if you can raise the skill level up to where that you can make the defense panic and get into these actions that lead to just simple yes or no decisions, and you're consistently making those decisions right and not worrying about if the ball goes in or not, because the process will win out. And I think, to me, like, that's panic thinking in a nutshell, of like, if you can consistently hit these yes or no reads, and if your skill is high enough, then the defense will have to communicate and they will mess up. And then all of a sudden the shell is cracked. We're playing from an advantage. We're making, again, if you're playing from the advantage, you're making yes or no reads again. And that's just, to me, that's the goal of any possession.
Yeah, especially like when it comes to like the playoff, because they know your game kind of like
Yeah.
if they go up to Western Conference Finals, Eastern Conference, they know how you're gonna play, and it's just making sure that there is that small variance that make them communicate something that they should not or they didn't think they would have to
Hmm.
communicate. This is also I think where like coaching comes into place. I think like it was in 2020 there were like this series Raptors against the Celtics, and it was Nick Nurse against Brad Stevens, and it was an on and on like we're
Hmm.
going to throw you plays that you're
Hmm.
not used to see just to
Hmm.
see how you react. um I thought it was that was the is so fun to write and to look at the playoff. Regular seasons has been fun, I think, this year. Like there is team playing so much differently. Like I've did a video on like the Utah Jazz playing like a NFL team, for example, because
Hmm.
I feel like because they don't have a point guard or like a ball handler that can create. They
Yeah.
run plays when there is like let's say Kelly Olynyk that has a dead ball kind of in
Yeah.
this position, and he's just waiting to see the difference like movement and throw the pass to like the receiver so he can get the layup. And I feel like I haven't seen that much before because they do that all the time with
Yeah.
different players that just there you have four players that come and run and one player that like just moving relentlessly or just catching the ball. And I was thinking, like, what do you look at when you look at the regular season, especially if you have some clients? Like, what are the things you look at on your client, but also looking at on, the regular seasons of just regular games? Like, do you catch some games a lot, or you do mostly watch the players that are your client?
Yeah. I usually watch my clients, but I'll catch other games all the time because you're consistently looking at like, for instance, if I've worked with point guards before, and like if they're about to play a team, well, does that team play drop coverage? Like, do they go touch to drop? Are they deep drop? Are they blitzing stuff like in pick and rolls? So like I'll consistently like see a ton of the league and see what's going on. And to me, like when I'm looking at stuff in the regular season with a client, like it's way more about like, okay, like within your team, what is your role? What are they asking you to do? Like, where are your opportunities and how are you hunting those opportunities the best you can? And in those situations, like, you just want to think about, like, I'm doing X and I'm doing X the best I can. Like, you don't want to think about, like, I'm doing X, but like I think I should be doing Y. So I'm gonna just go off script because like that never works. Like it's just not a good formula. So like every team has something that like they care about, that like this is the thing that they're locked in on, and like finding that and like making sure like that's the thing you're trying to be effective at, like that matters more than anything else. Because if you don't, you just stick out like a sore thumb, and like if you stick out like a sore thumb, you go to the bench.
Yeah, definitely. And then if you go to the bench more too often, then you're out of the rotation because the guy might follow the script. And this guy, if he follows the script well, then he will just stay in the rotation. And maybe another question that really came to mind when I was reading your articles, and it felt new because I never read you before, but at the same time, it felt like you kind of know to write per se. And how did you like start writing? Like, what was the process like? Because those articles felt different than what I usually read, but at the same time, they're like neat in terms of as a reader, the experience of reading it are pretty good. So like how did you came out with like starting writing articles and why did you start?
So I didn't, like, when I worked with guys for the past 5 years, I didn't film anything, I didn't publish anything, I didn't do anything because I just feel like when you're working with somebody and you're trying to change these things that, if we're working on it, means you're not good at them. And so if I'm going to ask you to be bad at something, and because that's the only way you're going to get better. So if I'm going to ask you to fail at something, then we're going to also have a camera in there, that's not going to be a good formula for like building trust or anything like that. So I didn't ever do anything for these 5 years. And then I was like, I have so many conversations with people in the league or friends with basketball. And I was like, I kind of just want to start putting some pieces out or publishing some things that like I think are cool about basketball. So it really started from there of like, I'm going to try. And then writing wise, I'm actually not a good writer, but Grammarly helps so much. so much. My first piece that I wrote is probably by far the worst, and my wife, bless her heart, like she probably had to read it 10 times because I was like, "Do I put a comma here? Do I put a comma here?" And now I'll just let her. I'll like put it in front of her. I'll be like, "Will you read this and make sure that I'm not crazy before I hit like send to everybody's email?" Like so now it's not so much, but Grammarly is the best. But I really like love talking about hoops, and I've had this cool experience of working with guys, and I feel like I have a little bit of knowledge to share in terms of like giving back to the game, and I just wanted to put stuff out. So I just started going, and I was like, I'm just gonna write something, and I'm gonna see like that I thought was going on that was cool, and I'm gonna see kind of where it goes. So I feel like I found way more of my niche of player development, shooting with guys, scouting. So I just put one out today. That's like how I build a plan and kind of what I'm looking at when I'm looking at a shot. So I think that one's pretty good.
Yeah, and you seem to having fun when you do it. And I also feel like sometimes we do stuff because it's just fun to do. Like we don't expect any outcome. It's just fun to do.
I have no expectations of it other than like I just want to talk hoops. And so when I put one out, like things like talking with you, like we would have never met if I didn't put stuff like that out. Or, there have been people that have emailed me today that I never would have talked to if I didn't put this piece out on how I create a plan and stuff like that. So, I've been in the hoops world for 20 years, 25 years, and especially like the elite world of it for maybe like 10. And I just think like it's such a small world and you never know like who's looking at stuff or who's not. And I have no expectations of this other than just like share a little bit of like basketball stuff that I think is cool.
Yeah, and it was the Atlantic. And it was only your second article. Is one of the guy, like we have like some main guy, I guess, in the
Uh-huh.
the basketball area in France, and especially when it comes to like tactical and analysis, we have like a guy called Guillaume. He has created like a podcast called the Basket Lab, which is like basketball laboratory per se.
Okay.
And on that for that podcast, we have like a Discord. It's even like darker than Twitter. Like it's only like I get like 50 to 100 of people talking things about basketball on
It's
it.
like
We have
real
different
granular, like real deep in the weeds. Yeah. Yeah. Like,
exactly. But
yeah.
it's the best. Like it's the best because
Yeah.
we don't have the Twitter thing of like you don't say something to look cool. You say something and you have conversation because it's very
Yeah.
interesting. And there is this guy Antoine. He always find like some of the niche article on Subtract. And yeah, like I was saying at the start of the article, he shared one of yours, and I was like, "But who's this guy?" Like there's two article. There is like 10 followers on Twitter, and the content is. I was like, there's something behind it. I need to better understand. And then
Uh,
like that's why I was asking the question. Like usually people start by writing about basketball, then they start doing other stuff. This is kind of the like not the end of the story, but like you came around writing because you have been doing like so many stuff before.
Yeah,
So
like
that
the
is pretty
Jokic
cool.
article. Thanks.
Yeah.
The Jokic article like really came from I was on a phone call with one of my friends who's an agent, and we were talking about something, and I was like, "Dude, there was this game in Atlanta." I was like, "You," it just flipped for him. Like he was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, there was this game in Atlanta like 4 years ago." He's like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "There was this game in Atlanta, and Jokic like he just had it. Like he was out there and like from the jump, like he was just going like ultra aggressive, letting threes fly. Like they were playing deep drop on everything, like trying to take away the splits." And he was like, "Oh, word?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I was like things like that where I'm having these talks all the time for the past couple of years. I was like, let me put some other stuff out there and see if people think it's cool.
And it's pretty fun because it's another way of seeing the game. And maybe one last question before I let you go is like you said you've been in the industry for like 25 years. You've been working with the elites for 10 years. What would you say?
25. Wait. No. I was playing. Don't make I'm not that old. I'm not that old. Stop. No. No.
You
No.
start playing when you were
I
25 and you've been
started
playing
playing. I started playing.
when you were I'm
Come on.
sorry.
I just met a guy at Lifetime Fitness and started working out a little bit ago. Come on. I'm not
Sorry. let me rewind. You've been in the industry for a long time. Let's say just that.
There we go.
Long enough that you've seen thing changes,
Hmm.
and I love change. Pretty much, I love to study change. I've done that at school too, like change management. What would you say have changed the most since you've started working and being around the basketball world? Like the
Oh,
thing that changed
like
the
the
most?
NBA world,
Yeah, mostly.
mostly. Okay. Whew, man, I think that the biggest thing that's changed is probably the emphasis on shooting in terms of how teams play defense. Um, I think like it used to be where, teams went into the season and they just played defense. And it was like, okay, we're going to play this type of defense. Like pick and roll coverages used to have bigs up at the level more like 10 years ago or 7 years ago. And now, if somebody can't shoot, they're just like, cool, we'll take quickest path and we'll go under and we'll keep our like the level of strategy that has kind of been injected. And I think it all builds around because I think shooting is kind of like the core of how basketball moves. Like if you can, then you have to do things differently. So I think the level of strategy that exists, like the Timberwolves, for instance, you were talking about Rudy. And the reason I wrote the first piece is I thought they were doing this thing that was so cool for the regular season, which was like they would just pick out whoever the worst shooter was that they thought out of the four people that aren't the big guy, and they would put Rudy on him and just tell him don't guard him. Like, okay, like you can shoot as much as you want. And this for a regular season game was unheard of like 10 years ago. Like that was like a playoff strategy. And they just started from the jump from the first game. Like, they play the Nuggets and Aaron Gordon, and Rudy's in the lane and Aaron Gordon's just dribbling at the 3-point line. Like they really made this like concerted effort of this is the best way for us to handle situations with these two bigs out here. And then on the offensive end, like they just hunt whoever the small guy is and post him up. Like now they don't do it all the time, but way more in a regular season game than you would see like, 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And I think that's maybe like the thing that's changed the most, the level of strategy and the level of strategy that is built around like, can you shoot or can you not shoot? And from there, like teams are getting really, really dialed in on, well, prove it to us. When you made one, like you said about Draymond making a few, like we don't believe you, prove it to us. Or nail help is in the middle, or we're taking a step closer until you prove it to us. We're taking a step closer. So I think that's maybe the biggest thing that's changed. The strategies are incredibly intelligent and they just keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter.
Yeah, you don't see like two players at the dunker spots in a driving line anymore. You've seen that
No.
before, but you don't look like so long ago, and there were like two people at the
Yeah.
both dunker spot, and you're like,
Huh? What?
why? Yeah,
It's like the
it's
Spider-Man meme. They're like, what are you doing?
exactly.
What are you doing here? I got this space.
That's my spot. Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
think I totally agree. Like the level of strategy and the optimization of spacing. Like every space of the floor can be used for some reason. You
Mhm.
just need to have, you don't have really good play. If you have the good strategy, you don't really always need as much the good player. It's really more about like, how do you use more than who do you use for?
Like I don't know who the top 10 teams are in the standings for both conferences. Like I really don't right now. I couldn't rattle them off like exactly the 10, but I would venture to say that those 10 teams can shoot the basketball, or they have a different thing that we were talking about, a pressure point. Like they can put a pressure point every single possession that they know they can create a rotation from. And I think the teams that are probably at the bottom 10 of the league, they don't have that either shooting or space where they can put an exact pressure point on the defense. And so I think that's the level of strategy. Like if you can't do that, well, we're not going to crack our shell for you. Like we're not going to go over something, or we're not going
Yeah.
to stretch ourselves out just so you can have an advantage. And I think you'll see that in like the separation of the good teams and the bad teams. They can either really shoot the ball or not really shoot the ball. And they have one specific pressure point that they know they can go to any possession and then play from a crack shell. And the teams that are down here, they don't have either A, the shooting, or B, that specific pressure point where they can crack the shell consistently and play from an advantage.
We really talked about cracking shell today. And it's been good fun because it's like, it's all you create differences. And thank you very much for it. Was really a crazy conversation. I'm really glad we were able to talk with someone that like directly work with people that have played in the NBA and still playing, to have a bit of sense of like what's really happening behind scenes. And for all the listeners in France and abroad, maybe, I hope we crack the shell of your analysis and understanding of like shooting the basketball. And maybe we'll come back with more episode in English. And like I said before, there is all the subtitles in YouTube for French speaker. So go up on YouTube, go up on Spotify, and keep listening to Beyond the Hoops.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.